about the power of podcasting to build your brand. So first, let me ask you, Carrie, what's your brand? And what was the brand journey to get here?
Yeah, I think for me, it started back in 2008, really this podcasting journey, because I started listening to podcasts back then. And so I, at that point, was getting so much inspiration to start what would be later my business. And so long journey to that whole point. I started as an online business manager with my business. And that's really what propelled me in realizing, okay, I don't really want to be doing 500 different things. I really want to focus on building people's brands through podcasting, because I was really doing that, even though it was kind of out of scope with my OPM business.
Yeah.
But I was like loving it. And so then I became known. And I will say this, once you kind of niche down into your brand, it's so much easier for people to refer you, for people to know who you are, because all I did was that one thing. They're like, I just had this happen recently where somebody needed mentorship in podcasting in a group I'm in. They're like, Carrie's your go-to person because I'm known for this thing.
Welcome to the Turbo Branding Show, where we will help you ignite your growth by leveraging your brand to grow faster, easier, and more successfully. You'll discover insightful conversations from our powerful guests, founders, CEOs, and advisors for thriving businesses who are sharing how they've successfully built strong brands to help you expand and grow. I'm your host, Sue Kirshner, and today we're welcoming Carrie Lubing to the show. So let's delve into today's episode and turbocharge your brand. First, thank you for being here, Carrie.
Thank you for having me, Sue. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on to talk about the power of podcasting to help individuals and organizations build their brand. So before we jump into that, let's start by introducing Carrie. So Carrie is a seasoned podcast producer and content strategist with over 20 years of leadership experience in property and retail management. So she made a career switch and is dedicated to helping business professionals amplify their voices through strategic, personalized podcasting services. Her comprehensive approach goes beyond editing. So she helps integrate podcasting into her clients' overall business goals to drive growth and impact. Her extensive leadership background equips her with the insight and innovation necessary to simplify the podcasting process, allowing clients to focus on content creations while she's in the background managing the complexities. Carrie's known for her professional, supportive, and strategic brand voice, and she empowers businesses to share their unique stories through high quality, impactful podcasts. So welcome, Carrie. Did I miss anything in that?
No, it's always funny when you actually hear that out loud.
I know. You're like, wait.
Is that me?
Is that me? That sounds really cool. Awesome. So, all right, let's dig in, because I obviously with my podcast, I am loving it. So I want to talk about the power of podcasting to build your brand. So first, let me ask you, Carrie, what's your brand? And what was the brand journey to get here? Because obviously you were doing something completely different before than what you're doing now.
Yeah, I think for me, it started back in 2008, really this podcasting journey, because I started listening to podcasts back then. And so I, at that point, was getting so much inspiration to start what would be later my business. And so long journey to that whole point. I started as an online business manager with my business. And that's really what propelled me in realizing, okay, I don't really want to be doing 500 different things. I really want to focus on building people's brands through podcasting, because I was really doing that, even though it was kind of out of scope with my OPM business.
Yeah.
But I was like loving it. And so then I became known. And I will say this, once you kind of niche down into your brand, it's so much easier for people to refer you, for people to know who you are, because all I did was that one thing. They're like, I just had this happen recently where somebody needed mentorship in podcasting in a group I'm in. They're like, Carrie's your go-to person because I'm known for this thing. So
awesome. It works. Yeah. Branding works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Excellent. So you've touched on it a tiny bit, but let me ask you a little bit more. What do you love about podcasting? Why does it make you, passionately involved in trying to help others do it?
It's just, I think because from when I was little, I just love storytelling. And that's the part I love about it. And people always ask like, oh, well, this subject's kind of boring. And I'm like, not if you're good at storytelling though. So like you can even make finance interesting, surprisingly, or,
Mhm.
typical boring, more boring subjects. So it's
There's
really,
an awful lot of podcasts on accounting. That's all I have to
I know,
say.
which is so, it's so amazing for those people because they're getting their message out. But yeah, it's really the storytelling. And then because I have a business brain from a business side, you create all this long form content that's out there for basically forever unless you pull off your show off the network. I mean, even if you stopped, I've had people tell me that they've stopped their podcast for whatever reason. They're like, I still get people emailing me about the show and things like that. So it's just two, I like one is the storytelling and two is the way it can really help grow your business. It's a long form way of staying out there.
Right, right. Now, do you find it's difficult to get people to really commit to that long form?
As clients, you mean?
Yeah.
I feel like I know what you're saying, but I think where people find me is, I guess maybe because I've talked about this, is like if you're one of those people that uses Instagram stories and you're like, well, I don't feel like I can go into this subject very long here. Like I have a doctor, she's got a lot of complex topics that she talks about. There'd be no way she could get into that on there. So she's like thinking, how could I do that? I don't really want to just make a 5 minute long Instagram story. Podcasting would be the next thing for me to do.
Right, right. No, I like that because branding's a long-term process, right? It's all
Yeah.
about building relationships. So you're not going to be able to do that, by, next Tuesday, I need to suddenly have a big brand and things like that. And I've always equated brand building to exercising, right?
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Because it's one of those things where it's like if you want to build a strong brand, if you want to build a strong body, you have to commit to it and you've got to
Yeah.
work on the strength, the flexibility, the commitment and things like that. And just like exercising, if you stop at any point, it's amazing how fast you lose everything that you put into it to
Yeah.
try and build up that strength and gain. And I think brand building is just like that. You can't start some of these tactics like podcasting, or even if you were doing a video show, or even social media is a long-term game when it
Hmm.
comes to branding. But you can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to do a couple episodes and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we talked about this when we met a couple weeks ago. I always say to clients, people ask me before they work with me, well, do I have to sign a certain contract? No, for me, I do month-to-month contracts, but with a caveat, I don't want you starting a podcast and being like, oh, I want to quit in 3 months. So I really want to know people, just even for them, that they're committed at least for a year to
Yeah.
doing it because it gives you that time too to see, okay, do I like this? It takes a little while for probably now to get your groove on interviewing if you're doing an interview show and just seeing the metrics and what your audience wants. So you need some time to see how all that plays out.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's riff a little bit more, if you don't mind, on
Sure.
the power of podcasting to build your brand. Because as I've started doing this, I can definitely see some advantages for me and my business. But let me just ask you, what is the power of it? What can you do with podcasting to build your brand and that you've seen maybe your clients really get good at?
Yeah, I mean, I think one which is probably like the biggest one as of late is my doctor client. She
Hmm.
was easily able to get on ABC News here in Chicago.
Mm.
And she had a little bit of a connection, but then hearing her on her podcast weekly was like, oh, this lady really knows what she's talking about. So she was able to book that. So for her, that was her main goal, is speaking and then also, educating people. But
Hmm.
then another example is just, and this is where sometimes it's hard to put metrics on podcasting for people. You're exposed to people that you would never meet because of your podcast. So it's
Yeah.
sort of the secondary benefit that I know, if you're investing in this too, especially because you're like, what am I getting out of it? But you can't put a number on those kind of connections because one connection leads to the next one. And it's just kind of a snowball effect.
Yeah, yeah. No, 100% agree on that. So, yeah, because there was some of the things that I had just written down, jotted down as a note was, obviously you touched on showcase your expertise, right? You get
Yep.
a chance to just talk about what you believe in, what you know, what you've experienced. And the PR example is awesome. Someone notices that and decides that they want to hear more from you, or a client wants to hear more from you. The other thing that I've been talking about a little bit on all of the turbo branding shows lately is this whole idea about being authentic, right?
Yes.
So in today's environment, there is so much baloney out there, right? There's fake
Yes.
news. People don't trust organizations anymore. They see something online and they don't know whether it's real or not, and it gives them this dissonance like, oh my gosh, why do I have to do research just to read this article?
Yeah.
And so I think podcasting, because you get the opportunity to hear someone and to hear them not scripted, but really
Yeah.
just kind of, and some podcasts are scripted, but, to hear them just talking, you can be authentic, which then attracts clients to you because they feel like, okay, like you were talking about, I feel like I got to know this person a little bit
Yeah.
before I decide I'm going to talk to them. So the other thing I think the podcast allows people to do is to show the empathy that you have for your customers' challenges, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're doing an interview or whether you're just talking about a topic, you're really kind of showing that, hey, I know what you're going through. I have empathy for that. And let's talk about how I might be able to help you. But again, you talked about meeting people, and that's awesome. I have met a ton of people just starting to do this podcast that no one would have introduced me to them if I was saying, hey, do you know anyone who needs branding?
Yeah.
Right.
No.
But if I say, hey, I'm looking for guests for my podcast, suddenly doors are opening. But the other thing too, from a brand, so let's say for my brand, for Chairboy Branding, it's just taking off. It's just starting. But I can elevate my brand by stealing a little bit of the brand juice that some of my guests have when you bring higher profile, especially within your industry, higher profile people on. And I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen that as well.
Oh, I have. Yeah, I mean, several of my clients, there's no way that some guests that they've had, and I think you mentioned this, they're not like famous. Maybe you and I wouldn't know because we're not in those industries, but
Right.
in their industry, this is like a famous person. The person wouldn't have agreed to talk to them if they wouldn't have said, and let's be real, there's something in it for them. So that's why it's a little more enticing, right?
Yeah.
You've got something to give. And honestly, this probably goes into more like tactile things. But if you're doing it right as a podcaster and elevating that guest, like giving them assets to share after the podcast, and it makes it even more enticing because they're
Right.
basically getting free media from you.
Right. Right. And it's a nice way to showcase your brand voice, right? So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're fun and playful, how do you bring that out in the
Yeah.
podcast, right? Is it
Yeah.
maybe that you have silly questions or
Yeah.
now I don't know if your clients talk to you about that, about, oh my gosh, I sound so serious, or oh, help me get a tone right.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, and maybe this is negative, but I think it makes people feel more comfortable. But I'm like, you're probably not going to like the first few episodes. You got to just power through it.
Yeah.
And then actually through that, we talk about what did you like? What didn't you like? And each time we're kind of refining as we go. Most of the clients I meet with every quarter. So then we'll kind of put on a cadence of like, that's something we want to adjust or change, or what other questions could I infuse to make it, like you said, make myself seem more fun and not so serious, especially some of the topics people talk about are more serious. So.
Right. Right. Excellent. Okay. So, next question I have for you is we know a lot about how experts or thought leaders are using podcasting, but there's a lot of companies who have podcasts too, right?
Mhm.
Do you, I don't know if maybe you can share some examples of ones that either maybe are clients of yours or that you've seen that are just like, wow, that was a really cool idea to create a podcast about that.
Yeah, I can't remember because we talked about this too. There's a company that I know actually, and I think it's their marketing department. They switched the host basically, which I think is a really cool way to show like not only for me as a listener, I'm like, oh wow, they really trust their employees. This seems like a good environment because they're letting these people basically lead the podcast and it shows that company in a more human way. They're not just out for dollars, they're there to help, and they're really not even selling, I would say, on this podcast. They're really trying to help. And I can't remember the name. I'll try to remember the name if you want to put it in the show notes for people
Okay,
to look
perfect.
at.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, I did a little Google searching and, I brought up a couple examples of companies using podcasting that I thought was really kind of cool. And like I said, there were like 16 accounting podcasts that were
Yeah.
out there where accounting firms are trying to educate and connect with their clients, whether that be large companies or small companies and things like that. And so that I thought was fascinating. And then it's a pet peeve of mine, but I'm going to go with it anyway, is I hate it when people talk about examples of branding and they only use the big giant companies, right?
Yeah.
Because my audience is small and mid-sized businesses. And
Yeah.
so I really want to highlight where the activity is going on in branding there. However, I found a couple examples of larger companies, mostly because that's what happens when you Google it,
Yeah.
that I thought might inspire other people because I think they're doable at a small and mid-sized business level. So one of them was Trader Joe's, right? The
Yeah.
first time
That's so cool. I didn't know that.
I know the first time I was at Trader Joe's, I'm like, wait, what? Why do they have a podcast,
Yeah.
right? But when you read why they have it, it totally makes sense. Trader Joe's says they're all about the three P's. They're all about price, their products, and their people. So when I went and looked at the episodes of what they're doing on their podcast, they highlight their people all the time. And they highlight why that's part of the customer experience and why people shop at Trader Joe's, because their people are so awesome. But then the other reason it works to focus on their products is because they're changing them out constantly.
Yes.
So then it makes sense to say, hey, pumpkin season is out, or hey, it's summer, and things like that. So I thought that was something that maybe small businesses or mid-sized businesses could glom onto. The other one was Sephora has a podcast on lip stories. And you're like, okay, and they start with the premise of they are highlighting and interviewing super powerful women or powerful women that they admire because that's their audience, right? That's who their customer is. And then they pull it back to saying, what lipstick do you use? Show me your power color and things like that. And I thought that was just a really cool way to have a podcast where you're honoring your customers, right?
Yeah.
So
I thought of two examples actually as you were talking, but
okay.
I didn't know either of those companies, and I've shopped at both actually. But I had a thought about Trader Joe's, especially. Not only does that having that podcast maybe bring in new people who don't shop at Trader Joe's, but it keeps those existing customers, like they're addicted to Trader Joe's now and they're loving that podcast. They probably won't stop shopping there, in my opinion, because they're like hooked and just in with the brand. But so one of the podcasts I thought about is HoneyBook. I don't know if you're aware of HoneyBook. That's what I use for my CRM and invoicing. And it's big in the wedding industry, actually. They have a podcast and they're one of the ones that kind of rotate staff who interview either different business leaders or even people who, which is a soft way of selling, bring in customers who've really changed their business through their product.
Yeah.
So, and then a personal client that I don't know why I forgot when you asked, he has a wedding event business. And so basically he has on different people in the wedding event space and is really trying to help couples. He's coming at it from helping them, obviously if he gets business from it, it's great, but it's mainly to help couples through that wedding planning process. And he's already gotten a really good reaction from the podcast. So
no, I love it because all of these examples are examples, they fit within a marketing strategy and a branding strategy because they help say like Trader Joe's is highlighting their culture and they're highlighting their products and they're using this forum to do that. And that's all part of your brand. So they're telling their brand story. Sephora is using this opportunity in their podcast to highlight their audience and attract their audience, which is a huge part of the brand. And then, I like what you're saying about both of those examples of, let's say the wedding planner, they're trying to provide value to who their customer is, right? And so it's like, we can talk about subjects that are adjacent to mine because all of it benefits you, who is my customer. So exactly. I love that. I love that. So, and I guess, this all evolves into the next question I had on my list, which was, how do you help your clients align these podcasting efforts with their overall business goals so that they can get long-term growth and impact? I mean, what's the process of you working with the customer to figure, or your client to figure that out?
It's really meeting with them. So once they want to go forward, we do a 90-minute strategy session. And I have a ton of questions that I ask them. They're sometimes like, oh my God, this is so many questions. But it's because I really want to know what their business is like, what they offer. And so that I can guide them. And then also ask, what is the goal? If the goal is to sell, if they're a coach and their goal is to sell their coaching services, how do we do that in a way? And because a lot of people are very hesitant to sell directly in their podcast. So I guess I'm a coach in a way too, because I'm encouraging them to sell, but do in a way that feels comfortable with them. And then also, I think did you mention it? Like a podcast isn't scripted necessarily, but to have sort of a basis, like kind of what you're doing, you have a basis of what you're going into the interview with. And I help them strategize that and make sure that they're not going off script. Cause sometimes I don't know if you listen to podcasts and you're like, wait, what is this about? Why am I hearing that?
Yeah, we've totally deviated.
Yeah. And so you can a little bit, but especially in the beginning, you kind of want to stay so the audience knows this is what I'm going to expect from this podcast. And I'm really directing it all from what I know about their business so that it aligns, whether it's thought leader, making more money, etc. And then I can guide them through that whole process.
Got it. No, I like that. And it's so helpful. What are some of the biggest challenges business professionals face when they're starting a podcast? Because there's challenges in just getting started, right? Deciding to do it. And then there's challenges for the implementation part of it. So what are some of the biggest challenges in each bucket?
Yeah, I would say sometimes people come to me like, what equipment do I need? And I'm kind of like, let's put that over here because really that's the smallest part of it. I don't know if
Right.
you now doing this so many times you agree or not, but to me, it's really what I just said earlier. It's the strategy. Why are we doing this? What are your expectations out of this too? And then I would say going to what people find challenging is keeping up on the podcast. So what you're doing and batch recording a lot of these episodes is exactly what I tell clients. And sometimes they'll laugh at me. You want me to do 12 episodes before we even launch? And I'm like, yes, because
Yes.
you're going to inevitably have life happen. You're going to get sick. Your kids, something will happen. And then you're off an entire month and you have no pressure now to go ahead and record. So I would say that's probably the hardest part. If you do get off and then you're rushing to get every week a podcast out, that's probably a little bit of the stress with people. And then I think people sometimes find the booking guests, if they have a guest show, they find the booking process a little bit challenging if they don't have a system, which is where I would come in and help them. But sometimes people call, oh, everything's scattered or we're not getting people the things they need after an interview. And so really setting up, I'm a big systems on everything if you can't tell. So setting up a system using Calendly to get your guest stuff in order. And yeah, I don't know if that answered the question or not.
No, it absolutely answered the question because it's, yeah, I mean, I'm even thinking, so I'm going to kind of go through my process is, at the beginning, I've thought about doing a podcast for a couple of years,
Yeah.
but I never did it, right? So, and,
Yeah.
and then you start to, get caught up in your head about, oh, well, the world doesn't need another podcast, or, oh, I
Right.
missed the boat. I should have launched the podcast 5 years ago and now it's too late. Or,
Yeah.
you give yourself a million reasons why not to do something, but it's one of those things, or, I don't like the way I sound, or I don't think
Yeah.
I'm gonna be good at this, or whatever. How do you help them through the mental part of that? If it seems like they really want to do it, but the fear part is what's keeping them
Yeah.
back, how can you kind of help them or talk them through that?
Yeah, I think I go back to their why, especially with people who've been in their industry for a while and have something to share. Like, I'm like, remember, they're here. They're not going to hear you like you're criticizing yourself. So it's a lot of encouragement, I would say.
Hmm.
And then just saying, the first few, maybe you don't have 100 people listening to it. So you have time to kind of not worry about, 1,000 people listening to you. But
Yeah,
it's just really reminding them of why they're doing it. And nobody's being as critical about you as you are to yourself.
right. Exactly. So, and yeah, you were absolutely spot on earlier about, yeah, the first three episodes. I mean, I like them, don't get me wrong, but I wish I could go back and redo my portion of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you have to do that. You have to go through the process of, walking through the episodes and actually doing in order to see where you could possibly help. And that's why I love the idea of you being able to do these quarterly check-ins
Yeah.
with your clients, because yeah, I would love someone to critique me. I mean, I'm not a huge fan. No one is, but I'm not a huge fan of criticism, right? But
Right.
for this, I really want this show to be good. So
Yep. Yep.
I'm absolutely open to feedback on how to make it better. And I would love, a pro like you to be able to provide me with that kind of insight.
Yeah, yeah. Because I really, when I, especially, I'm like, oh, I need to tell this client, like when I edit, because I'm still doing some editing, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, they should have asked this follow-up question. So I do kind of keep a note, like, let's, and nothing's perfect, but it's just a little improvement that could,
Yeah.
help the audience get more out of the interviews.
Yeah. So let me ask you two more questions, actually maybe three, but
Sure.
what advice do you have for your clients on there's different formats for a podcast, right?
Right.
So maybe you can walk through what are some of the different formats, because that might help people get over some of the fear of doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously interview, that's probably the most common. I'm a big proponent though, on if you are selling your service in some way, especially not just coaches, but maybe even service providers in some way, like doing some solo episodes. Might be getting off on a tangent here. This is more from a marketing point, but so they really get to know you as a person. And these don't have to be the same length as a guest episode would be. This could be 10, 20 minutes of you just saying, I just felt like I had to share. I just got off a phone with a client. I feel like I have to share this. It might help you in some way of your life,
Hmm.
just so they get to know you a little bit more. Because quite honestly, guest podcasts are about the guests, right? I mean, obviously they get to know you as the host a little bit, but this really highlights yourself. And then there is a panel. I mean, sometimes there's like two hosts and a guest, or maybe it's a seasonal show and they have like 5 people on, which I wouldn't, that's a lot harder to
Yeah.
kind of control, but I have seen it done. And then there's, I don't know if this is in what you're asking, but there's obviously this kind of virtual recording or in person. I just think the barrier to entry in podcasting is virtual versus in person. That's a
Mhm.
huge lift financially and time wise to set up something in person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And yeah, you really need to be committed to invest in that kind of thing. But like you were talking about, the equipment part of it, it's important, but it's not that important when it comes to the
Yep.
overall, starting it and planning it. But it's amazing that I can do this from my office and,
Yep.
be able to just, have the right equipment, and it makes the barrier to entry so much easier, like you said.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you two more questions, but I'm going to throw this out here is, what's some final advice or best practices that you have for people who are thinking about going on this journey and launching a podcast?
Yeah. So I think if you're just kind of, or if you thought about it like you had done before you started, I would say write down at least 12 to 20 ideas of what you would want to talk about. Because to me, that not only helps get the process started, but then it validates to yourself, oh, I actually do, to your question, I'm another person or I don't have anything to say. It validates that that's not true, actually. So I would say, go ahead and do that and even start thinking like if you're doing a guest show, write down 20 names, what would they interview and then maybe match those topics together. So that's one thing. And then I would say just if you've got an inclination, just start.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, all right. So, my last question for you, and all of this has been absolutely fascinating. And like I said, I'm all in on podcasting. I'm having such a great time doing it. And like you had mentioned earlier, it's opening so many doors for me to meet people I would not have otherwise.
Yep.
So, I'm all in on it. And I'm so glad that there's someone like you who can guide people who are just getting into it, because it can be overwhelming in the planning. But
Yep.
then once you've got the strategy or the plan in place, then it's just a matter of implementing it. And each
Yep.
individual step is not that scary, right?
Totally.
So, so anyway, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. But what I want to do is one last question for you. Since I'm all about giving shout outs to small and mid-sized businesses who are just doing a fantastic job building their brand, is there a small business or any business that you admire because you think their branding is just so on point and well done?
Yeah, so they would be an ideal client, but I think she has an internal team helping her, but it's called The Doers. And then she has something called the Doers Club.
Hmm.
She's basically a marketing agency, but then she helps other small businesses get their messaging across, just everything to do with small business. And I just feel like everything she does from her Instagram to her podcast, all like the branding is just on point.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go check that out because that sounds
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
intriguing. So, all right. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really appreciate everything that you've shared with me and my audience. So,
Thank you for having me.
yeah. So, if people want to talk to you about whether a podcast would help them build their brand or how to improve their podcast, how can they find you?
So they can find me at carrielubing.com. I have a little form they can fill out, or they can direct message me on LinkedIn just under my name. I'm active on LinkedIn. So
Okay. All right. And you can take clients from anywhere, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I can work with client and I don't have a cap because I have a team that I'm growing. And so yeah, I'm always here to help.
Perfect. Perfect. So, well, thank you again. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would help me build the show brand. So please share this episode and be sure to like, subscribe, and maybe even add a review. And if you or someone you know would be a great guest for the show, an inspiring founder or a CEO who has done an amazing job with branding, please let us know in the comments or connect with us via email. But thank you and stay tuned for our next episode.